I absolutely love the DRZ. It's a fantastic bike for those that only want or can afford one motorcycle. This bike is ridiculously reliable. I've just hit 34,000 Ks on the dot at this sign. Virtually unbreakable. And incredibly tolerant to torture and mechanical neglect. Righto everyone, welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a long-term owner's review on my 2011 Suzuki DRZ400E. I'm going to go through some pros, some cons, and just some real-world experiences that I've had with this motorcycle after owning it for a little over 2 years and racking up about 41,000 Ks on it. So let's get into it. Now, if you're new to the channel and you haven't seen any of my videos, the type of riding that I do with my bike is anything from, really long haul sort of trips. For example, out to the Simpson Desert, that was a 5,000 kilometer round trip over the course of about 10 days or so, to the real sort of short, snotty, more enduro style day rides where they'll only last for about 200 or 300 Ks. So this bike for me is a bit of a do-it-all, and that's the reason I purchased it, was so I could have one bike that would do every type of sort of riding that I wanted to. Now I've got quite a bit to get through in this video, so I've written down a few things to try and punch through all of these points nice and efficiently without turning it into a 40-minute video. So let's start off with the pros. This bike has been practically unchanged for 20 plus years. It's nearly 25 years that this motorcycle has been not updated for. So everything is pretty much the same, which means the information that you're going to have to rely on, to lean on if you buy this motorcycle and you get stuck with something that you're not sure about. There is so much information out there, and the community behind this bike is massive, and it's super helpful as well. This also means that you're going to have a large amount of aftermarket support, secondhand parts, and parts that have been established from third-party companies, especially some of like the cheap Chinese parts. A lot of the time, those parts are just as effective as what you would buy from Suzuki Genuine anyway, excluding a few things. This bike is relatively lightweight, has a wet weight of about 140 kilos. Now, this is obviously before you put your goodies on there. That is going to increase the weight, assuming that you're buying this bike for a lightweight adventure bike. Even still, after you put some protective things on it, bash plate, handguards, case savers, all that kind of stuff, the weight will increase, but not as much as if it was a really big bike anyway. Easy to maintain. Like, this bike is really easy to maintain in terms of servicing, filter changes, oil changes, all that kind of stuff. It is very easy to maintain and is very friendly to learn on. It's great to learn how to work on a motorcycle. If you're unfamiliar with doing your own servicing, it is very easy to learn how to do this. It's great to learn how to load a motorcycle, and it's also great to learn how to ride a motorcycle off-road. It's very friendly, it's very forgiving, and it is incredibly durable, which you'll hear me say 1,000 times through this video, because it is. This bike doesn't have a stupid amount of power, yet it has a very usable amount of power. It has a lot of torque down low, especially for those off-road rides where things start to get a little bit rough and snotty and you may have bitten off a little bit more than you can chew. This bike is very forgiving in the way it delivers its power, and the power is very usable. This bike is easily customizable. It's simple, it's basic, there are no electronics, so the things that you do to it are generally mechanical and just nut and bolt fixes or upgrades. It is LAMS approved, which means if you're in Australia, you can have a learner's or your provisional bike license and buy this and go out and do the adventures that you want to do. You don't have to have a full license to buy this and then go and just get out there. It's incredibly reliable, it's incredibly tough. It has long service intervals, and now this is a little bit of a personal preference thing. The user manual says 6,000 kilometers for oil changes and I believe 18,000 Ks for a filter. Now, I don't really ever do that. I always service my bike around 2,500 to 3,000 Ks of mixed riding. There are certain circumstances where that'll definitely get pushed right out longer than that. For example, the Simpson trip that we done, that was 4,900 or something, just under 5,000 kilometer trip. We didn't touch the oil in that the entire time, and we just topped it up as needed. So it is good to know that this bike will handle very long service intervals if the circumstance calls for it. This bike also has plenty of tire options. It has a 21-inch front rim and an 18-inch rear, which gives you that option for many different configurations of tires depending on what type of riding you're doing. It's also a very affordable adventure bike. Now, if you're going to be just having the one bike like I purchased in the beginning, I wanted one bike to do it all. This is a great option in terms of how much the bike is going to set you back your initial cost, and then the upgrades that you'll do to it to personalize it to your own type of riding. It's everything about it is quite affordable. So with most of the pros out of the way, I've definitely missed some. If you can think of any other pros or reasons if you own one of these motorcycles, let me know in the comments section if I've missed any that you think are massive pros and reasons why you actually like your bike. Moving on to the cons. Now, these are a little bit subjective. Some people care about these, some people don't. They're going in the cons because myself and generally the majority of people that own this motorcycle think the same. So first off, it is a 5-speed gearbox. Now, this depends on the type of riding that you're going to do, but like we said in the beginning, I've purchased this bike for a bit of a do-all, which means we're going to be hitting those highway Ks, and a 5-speed on the blacktop for hours or hundreds of kilometers on end is not really ideal, which leads me to the next point, gearing change. If you're going to be using this bike for an adventure bike, again, tackling everything, you're generally going to want to change the gearing on it so it's not revving its absolute balls off on the highway, which is going to lead to generally excess oil burnage. The other thing is changing the gearing is going to lower the vibrations, and it's just going to make it a little bit more pleasant ride. Like, the last thing that you want to do is be hanging on to a single cylinder, revving really high for hundreds of Ks on end, day after day. It really isn't pleasant, with the stock gearing riding on the road. Having the stock gearing riding off-road is a completely different story. It is really, really fun and usable. However, I changed my gearing and to make it more friendly on the highway, and to be honest, there has not been really any circumstances where I've been in the thick brush or really hard, inclines, climbs, or anything like that off-road single trail where I've thought to myself, you know what, I'd really like the gear change back to the stock gearing. The seat height is tall. I think from memory it is around 945 millimeters tall. That is considerably tall for a bike. Now, if you're under 5'8", you're definitely going to struggle. You're going to be on the tippy toes of 1 foot. You're definitely not putting 2 feet down, especially not effectively. So this is one thing to consider, the seat height. The seat is terribly uncomfortable. It is basically like sitting on a piece of timber. After a while, you're going to find yourself standing, especially on those longer trips on the highway Ks that we discussed earlier. It is quite uncomfortable, and you will be relying on standing to ease some of that arse ache. The headlight is terrible. Riding after dark with the stock headlight is just asking for trouble, especially when you live, in Australia. We have a lot of wildlife that comes out on dusk. It's just, the visibility is incredibly poor. The first thing that you want to do, especially if you're going to be riding into the late hours of the day, or you're going to be out very far out in the bush, which is more than likely with adventure riding, you're going to want to upgrade that headlight. Poor wind protection. Now, this isn't a massive con, but it is still somewhat of a con. Stator issues. The charging stator on these DRZs can go. I've never had any issues with mine, touch wood. It has been absolutely fine, and to my understanding, it is more so in the earlier models from the 2010 and pre and the 2012 2011 and onwards, they didn't have these issues, but please correct me if I am wrong in the comment section. CDI relay issues. That has been an issue for me, and I didn't actually know about it until I had the problem. Had to troubleshoot it. I thought it was something else, and then after commenting this on a video during my rebuild, there was quite a few people that came out and said that they had the same problem. It's a little CDI ignition relay behind the headlight that can sometimes short out and fail, which then doesn't obviously supply you spark to the engine. And it's just a little bit of a pain in the ass to troubleshoot. So keep that in mind. If you do have issues and you've gone through the necessary checks with a multimeter, or someone has done it for you, it could be the CDI relay. Next sort of big thing would be the soft suspension. Now, this is particularly important if you are a heavy bloke or chick, or you're going to be loading this bike up for adventure riding. Now, I changed the suspension on mine. The front fork I didn't touch. I actually didn't mind, the response that I got from that for the type of riding that I was doing. I changed the rear spring. I didn't touch the shock. I went to a very heavy rear spring in it, obviously because that is where the majority of the weight is going to be sitting when I load the bike up. And I intentionally done this before the Simpson Desert trip that we done. When you're loading 20 plus liters of fuel, and then you're putting 10 liters of water on top of it, and then you're taking food and you're taking all of your luggage, and then obviously there's yourself. There is a lot of weight, especially over the sort of backside of the bike. So the suspension is definitely one thing that you're probably going to want to upgrade to some degree. Another thing worth considering as a con is that rear subframe has been known to crack on some motorcycles. This comes down to a loading and obviously a rough terrain type situation. The back of the subframe where it goes across the top underneath the fender has been known to crack along some of those alloy welds. So reinforcing is definitely a good idea. Brake and gear levers. Now, on this bike, they're right beside the engine casing. I've actually had this on mine where I fell off onto the right side and the brake foot pedal went straight into my engine casing, and the crack was so fine that I couldn't even see it. And the only way I noticed is that, riding off-road, oil collects dirt, and I could see the oil had been coming out ever so slightly out of this crack in my engine casing and going down the swing arm, and dirt was collecting on it. So it was a bit of a visual indicator to see what had been happening, have a little bit of an investigation. And I could see when I'd fallen off that the brake pedal had gone straight into the engine casing and cracked it. So having an aftermarket case saver on both sides, because they both sit right over the engine casing, is a fantastic idea, because the last thing that you want to do is be stuck in the middle of nowhere with a cracked casing because you've stacked it and now have no oil to put in your engine. Next thing, moving on to oil. Now, these bikes, they do burn a bit of oil. Especially in the higher revs, which I've gone into. This is definitely a con. Now, if you go through some of the forums, it's actually quite common seeing people cooking their engine. They run it into a dry seas because they don't check their oil levels, and especially if you're really on it hard, you're giving the bike a hard time, you're riding fast, or you're running it at high revs for a long period of time, they just burn more oil. It just happens. So keeping an eye on your oil levels frequently is a really good idea. When we were out doing big highway Ks on the way back from the Simpson Desert, to give you a little bit of context, we ended up doing, our last day was a 1,000K day, a little bit more, and we stopped probably 4 times to top it up because it was all 100+ kilometer sort of speed limits, and we were just burning through oil. To give you an idea, carrying oil, I just grabbed one of these little pop top. It's a 250 ml pop top juice bottle that I empty out and fill it with oil, and then just put it in a Ziploc bag, and I carry that with me on all rides. If I'm going to be doing a bigger ride, I'll obviously carry more, but this is just a bit of an insurance policy in case I pull up somewhere and check the dipstick and there's nothing on it. This is probably the most funny thing and one of my favorite things to stir people up about. Now, people love to have a cry if you say DRZ or DRZ. If you say it incorrectly, they will be the first one. The DRZ community, they are the first ones to get on you and tell you you're saying it wrong. And don't they what? I say DRZ, I don't know why, I've just sort of always said it that way. I fully understand that it is not the way in Australia we say Z. I just couldn't give two shits. But it is one of the things, if you buy one of these bikes, be prepared that you are going to forever be corrected and people will forever point out that you're saying it wrong just because they want you to know that you're saying it wrong. So another one of those little, it's definitely in the cons, but it's a funny con. It's one of those things that you've just got to shake your head and laugh at. Now, if you were to ask me if I would buy this bike again, I would hands down say yes. If I had to have one bike that I knew I was gonna take through all different types of riding in Australia, I absolutely love the DRZ. It's a fantastic bike for those that only want or can afford one motorcycle, that they don't want to spend 25 grand and wreck a bike. It's fantastic for beginners or people returning to the saddle after a long time out. This bike is ridiculously reliable. I've just hit 34,000 Ks on the dot at this sign. Virtually unbreakable. And incredibly tolerant to torture and mechanical neglect. If you're not great on the tools or you procrastinate when it comes to servicing and stuff like that, this is a motorcycle that will tolerate it much better than others. It has a fantastic loading capacity for adventure riding, which is why a lot of people buy this bike for a lightweight adventure bike. And to be honest, even if you're not buying it for a lightweight adventure bike, you're just buying it for a bit of do-all to commute on, some long day rides, some enduro riding, or just to go riding with the friends up the mountain for a bit, it will take you on the hardest tracks that you can handle skill-wise. It is a very capable motorcycle, despite what a lot of the hardcore enduro bikes will tell you. You don't need a two-stroke to get into some ridiculously challenging terrain on this bike. Just gonna walk it down for a little bit. At least I know I can control the speed a little bit better. But anyway guys, we'll leave the review here. There might be a few things that I've missed, or please let me know in the comments section if you think there's things that should have been in the pros or the cons list, and you know, let everyone know. This is one of those videos I'd like to try and help educate people before they buy this bike, or maybe if they have this bike, you know, some tips, some information that could help them. So as always guys, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video.